Hello, and welcome to 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. This week's tip, purge your old jokes. When I used to teach folks to sell laptops, I introduced myself by telling my story. I told retail salespeople how I sold laptops at retail stores in the mid-90s, and I liked selling laptops for several reasons. First, in the mid-90s especially, they were the coolest thing going. Second, customers were really excited by the tech, and they really needed mobility at that point, or they wouldn't be spending all that extra money for a laptop. Third, they did have higher price points than desktops. And finally, I joked, when I sold a laptop, I didn't have to lift a heavy monitor for the customer. Salespeople would chuckle at that last part up until about 2005. Then the line started falling flat. Eventually, I figured out why. See, when I sold computers, it was back in the day when monitors were CRTs, the big tube-type monitors, and they would weigh anywhere from 30 to 50 pounds each. By the mid-aughts, however, they were all LCD monitors, flat-panel monitors, weighing maybe 5 to 15 pounds, and lifting them was no big deal. My audience no longer had any experience with heavy monitors and couldn't relate to that line. See, times change, technology changes, and even you as a speaker will change over time. If you have some stock material or recurring lines you've used for some time, be sure to ask yourself, is this material still relevant? If the jokes you've told successfully for a while no longer get the chuckles that you expect, maybe it's time to ask yourself, what changed? And then purge that stale material from your bag of tricks. Stick around, and after the break, we're going to talk about the importance of introductions during your presentation. On my LinkedIn profile the other day as I prepare to re-enter professional life following my stroke back in June. I sat down and brainstormed keywords for my summary and major concepts I wanted to make sure that I land. That got me thinking about how we introduce ourselves in presentations. The main reason to include introductions in your presentation and to tell the audience about yourself is to tell them why they should listen to you. It all ties back to that common refrain on this podcast of WBTU, or why bring that up? Sometimes it's the WIFM, what's in it for me? But that WBTU is so important to everything that is in your presentation. Otherwise, it has no business being there. In the case of introductions, it basically means that for your introduction, you need to be able to answer the question, why are you the person in the front of the room? Why should your audience believe you? You want your audience to trust you, to believe you, or to at least think that you're credible. That's sort of the most important aspect of your introduction. The other element of your introduction is that you want to connect with them by establishing some common ground or reaching them emotionally. The type of introduction you use will be determined by a number of different factors, such as, does your audience already know you? How long do you have to speak? How large is your audience? What type of content are you delivering? There are a lot of different ways of introducing a speaker, and they are appropriate in different circumstances. This week, I want to just explore 4 of them in greater detail. And those 4 are, first, no introduction. Second, basic facts. Third, storytelling, which I'm sure you find shocking that I'm talking about. And fourth, host introductions. First, let's talk about no introduction. This is how many presentations actually begin. The speaker doesn't actually tell you anything about themselves. It has the advantage of taking less time. The speaker can get right into their content. It can also take some of the spotlight off the speaker and refocus it on the pure content itself. There are disadvantages, however. The trade-off is that the audience doesn't get to know the speaker and may have no reason to believe them. Choosing not to introduce the speaker can be appropriate when the audience already knows the speaker, or if the context of the presentation itself grants the speaker credibility. For example, if the speaker is a medical professional in a hospital or a salesperson in a retail store. This can also be the most sensible choice if time is severely limited. Still, skipping an introduction also means skipping an opportunity to connect with the audience. The second type of introduction is the basic facts approach, and it's probably the most common explicit introduction. Mine might sound like this. Hi, I'm Bill Monroe. I've been a trainer and technology evangelist for more than 15 years, and I've been a professional speaker for more than 20 years. I've worked in the podcast space since 2010, and I am passionate about helping folks become more effective speakers and presenters. I'm also a big fan of Star Trek, Doctor Who, Weird Al, and all sorts of other nerdy stuff. Now, the specific things that I highlight in an introduction will change based on the context of the presentation and what I'm trying to achieve or highlight, or what material I'm going to be talking about. But it generally is going to have those two parts. The first part of this introduction helps establish my credibility, in this case as a speaking coach and podcaster. The second part helps to humanize me and to make me more memorable as an individual. It helps me to stand out from the crowd a little bit, not only in a professional way, but by giving my audience a little bit of an insight into some of the other things that I just happen to think are really cool. All professionals should have an introduction like this ready to go. It's quite useful, not only in formal presentations, but for example, most job interviews will begin with, "Tell me about yourself." And this can be a great way to answer that. It's also the type of thing you might say when you're at a meeting and someone wants to go around the room so everyone can introduce themselves. It's just generally a good tool to have ready. There are several advantages to using this type of introduction in a presentation. First, you can build it by simply assembling bullet points about yourself that you probably already have. Second, it gets the job done quickly and gives the audience critical information that it needs. Third, it's one way to help establish a personal connection. Fourth, it does make it easy for you to say, "This is why you should believe me." But it also has some disadvantages, like they all do. The first disadvantage is that the bullets can be forgettable, especially if the audience will see multiple speakers that day. They may only remember your personal quirk or your personal passions. Second, it's even more important to clarify your WBTU, your why bring that up, when you do this type of introduction. And third, it's just not terribly exciting. The next way to do an introduction is to tell a story. Now, if I'm conducting a presentation about neuroplasticity or physical therapy, I might start it like this. I imagine myself sitting on a cliff at the Lorelei Beach on Canyon Ferry Lake outside of Helena, Montana. I sat there in the warm sun, and then I watched as a group of clouds quickly blew in from the west over the lake. They turned dark and started raining and storming just over the lake, just in the distance. And then just as quickly as they started, they stopped and continued to drift on past out of sight, and we were back into a full sunny day. That didn't last, though. The visualization just sort of faded. And I next imagined myself laying down on a cot in some sort of alien spaceship. I think I was kept prisoner there while maintenance was going on in another room of the ship. As I heard the clanking and the grinding and the banging, it sounded like hammers or some other alien technology was being used to beat this ship into submission. But that one didn't last either. I was actually laying in the middle of an MRI machine, trying desperately not to develop claustrophobia for the first time in my life, as the machine wound and ground and banged and clanked around me. Earlier on that June morning, I had woken up with a stroke, and right now, they were taking the very first pictures of my brain that would figure out just exactly what happened. Now, you see, in that intro, you learn a few things about me. You learn, first of all, that I am a stroke survivor, that I've spent time in Montana, that I spend probably way too much time thinking about spaceships, and you've learned that I don't have claustrophobia yet. This story is also a lot more engaging than just a collection of bullet points. It gives the audience something to hang on to, and it gives the audience a chance to wonder about what's going to happen next and where is this story going. It helps them establish an emotional connection in addition to just the logical connection of understanding why I have credibility to talk about what I'm going to talk about. You see, the advantage of storytelling here is that the story is more memorable because stories are more engaging than bullet points. I can engage the audience on those additional levels. And that's a powerful tool to use as a presenter. There are several disadvantages too. First, this approach does take more time. And when I approach it like this, I end up sharing less content. Of course, the audience is more likely to retain it, but there is lower volume of content overall. Another disadvantage is that the story might not be as relevant across a variety of presentation topics. If you're going to tell stories like this, you need to develop even more stories if you speak about a variety of things. A third disadvantage is that some hyper-task-focused audience members may be annoyed that they have to listen to this before they get to the meat of the presentation. Despite all that, however, this is still my preferred way to introduce myself to an audience. Maybe not this particular story, if I'm not going to be talking about anything related to neuroplasticity or stroke recovery, but I still prefer to tell some type of story to give the audience that much more insight into who I am and why they should care. The power of storytelling is simply too formidable to ignore. The fourth type of introduction that I want to touch on is the host, MC, or announcer-led introduction. This is going to be more common in larger venues or with bigger audiences. Figure it's probably going to start with audiences of at least 100. Or it's also the type of introduction you'll get for an interview on a podcast or TV or radio, for example. Generally, it's going to be the same intro as your basic facts introduction, but someone else is going to do it for you. Depending on the event, they'll often ask you to provide the text in advance, and then they will go ahead and read it. Of course, sometimes they'll just announce your name and title, in which case you'll still need to do your own introduction. The advantage of a host-made introduction, though, is that you don't need to introduce yourself. You also can have more credibility due to the implied endorsement of the person introducing you. The disadvantage is that you have to rely on someone else to get it right, and they may not deliver your introduction with the same passion that you would. And if they get something wrong, you may need to go ahead and correct them. Regardless, a host-made introduction may not be a choice you get to make. It may actually be decided by the event organizers. Of course, there is the common thread to keep in mind with your introductions. Regardless of the type of introduction or personal bio you're doing, no introduction, basic facts, storytelling, or host-made, you have to make sure that you connect it with your content and your audience. Be explicit if you're not sure your audience will get it. You can actually say, this is why this matters. And if you can't actually explain why it matters, then you need to rethink the whole thing. Well, that's it for this week. How do you introduce yourself to your audience? Let us know in the comments or go ahead and leave a message on the listener feedback line at 650-TALK-TIP. If you don't have an intro or professional bio, start working on one today. Review your stock material and purge stale jokes or other material that no longer works. And as always, don't get best, get better. And I'll see you next week.